of the things that parents actually err in is assuming that disability stops puberty.
Yeah.
So parents have this notion that just because their child is disabled in some way, has an impairment or one impairment or other, that will halt puberty. But
last week, we talked about early intervention and the importance it has for children who are living with developmental disabilities. Our guest at the time was Jackie, and she's a mother to a teenager, a son living with autism. And so we brought her back so that we can have a discussion about transitioning from childhood to teenage and what that has been like for her son, and also the repercussions of not training your child or educating your child on boundaries, especially when they are relating with the opposite gender. And so I will ask her to introduce herself.
So my name is Jackie Mathaga.
Yeah.
I am a Christ follower. I lead with that. I am a mom. I also run an organization called ADAT Foundation, Arthur's Dream Autism Trust. And one of our biggest projects with ADAT, apart from the work we do in advocacy for education, justice and healthcare for families of people with disabilities and persons with disabilities, children with disabilities, we also run a parent network that we call Through the Roof, which I think is actually the largest parent network in Kenya. So it brings together parents of children with all sorts of disabilities.
Yeah. And the reason why you formed TTR?
Yes. So so I formed so TTR was formed because I wanted support. So at the very beginning, when I was diagnosed, there was really no sort of support. And then for a while, I joined a different support group and then realized that it was operating only on the internet, and that we didn't have something physical. So no physical meetings, no nothing. And so I thought the kind of support that I needed at that time was to be able to meet with other parents, like face to face, to be able to sit and chat. So online support is good, but then it even becomes much better when you can see the people that who've been supporting you. So I then established then Through the Roof, and part of the work that Through the Roof also does is advocacy with churches, so that those who have disabilities are included in the church space. So we run it like a fellowship where we have 1 hour of fellowship followed by an extensive time, because parents sometimes leave when they want to leave, of conversation and training and growing together.
Okay. So when you started bringing people together, how was the reception? Did people fika immediately, or did you feel like there was some sort of resistance?
So there was, at the very beginning, we used to have 100 people, upwards of 100 people. But then because we had the pandemic, like in 2019, is it 2020, 2021? We didn't meet. I think we probably did 1 or 2 meetings in that year. So this 2022 has been a process of also restarting the process, and then also with a dip in income, it means then that the money that I had, so how TTR is funded from my pay. So I don't ask the parents to bring anything. So it's what I earn. Then once a month, I then do the forum for them. And so with a dip in income, it means also sometimes it will, it will stretch us when it comes to meeting. But we are persistent. I mean, today is a TTR event. We meet the first Saturday of every month. And we continue meeting because there is always need for support. There's always need for support. People always need somebody else to sit with somebody. So the space that TTR provides is space for parents to just come, have breakfast with someone, talk about other things that don't even include disability sometimes.
For King A, because now he's 16, and that means he has had a transition period. What was that like?
So transition, one of the things that parents actually err in, is assuming that disability stops puberty. So parents have this notion that just because their child is disabled in some way, has an impairment or one impairment or other, that will halt puberty. But there is a very big difference between hormones and disability. Your body will continue to grow older. Your hormones will continue to develop. For some kids, it might slow down, but for a lot of kids, it keeps pace with the years. So if a child is supposed, if it was a girl, if the child is supposed to get their periods at age 8, 9, 10, they will still get their periods at 8, 9, 10, even though there is a disability. So one of the things that we started doing very early on when I understood that was I started then preparing for puberty. And some of the things then that actually parents need to do in puberty is even understanding that for some kids, especially for some autistic kids, that it's going to take a bit longer for them to understand a concept, not because they don't understand it, but because you need to practice it over and over again until it becomes the norm. So one of the biggest ones for us is boundaries. My son has always loved girls, always. He loves pretty things. So if he sees, and then he also, I think, also prefers girls of a certain complexion. So he naturally will go towards girls. So to keep him safe, because this whole thing is about safeguarding your kid so that they're not misunderstood. To keep him safe, then issues of boundary have to be something that we discuss. In the work that we do with ADAT and access to justice, our biggest issue is because sometimes kids with disability have not been taught boundaries, and so they do something that to everybody else looks like it's a bad thing, but probably to them it doesn't look like that bad. For example, if you do not teach your child earlier on that they cannot touch a girl in a certain way, and then they touch a girl in a certain way, then you're in trouble with the law. And so you begin safeguarding your child by teaching them very early on the things that they need to know as boys and girls in teenagehood, and then also to keep them safe, because one of the things that we find also when we do our work access to justice is that people do take advantage of kids with disability and they're abused sexually. And so you need to safeguard your child by teaching sex education, you cannot avoid it, and by also making sure that you're teaching them about boundaries, body safety, so that they know for themselves that these things are required. It's also preparation for adulthood, because then they're going to at some point have a wife or be married, you know, and so you're doing all of these things with the long-term view that you want them to be safeguarded and that you want them to be safe adults.
So how did that conversation start?
So that conversation goes on, it starts from even simple things like keep your hands out of your pockets. Because boys are curious about their anatomy, and so it starts from making sure that when you're in the public arena, you're constantly reminding your son or even your daughter to keep their hands out of their pants. So that used to be something that I would say even in a supermarket, in church, anywhere, I'd be like, Arthur, hands out of the pants. So that then consciously it builds into his system that his hands are not naturally supposed to go into his lower anatomy. So it helps him so that anytime there's that urge to probably reach, then he's remembering hands out of pants and what it means. It means that over time that evolves to a mom's look.
Then he knows, oops.
Yes. So it just teaches him to be body safe and to be safe because what I want for him is for him to be safe when he's out in public.
And when now he's interacting with other people, is he aware that if maybe he walks up to me and he wants to say hi, or you've gotten to that place where he's aware what he can do and what he cannot do?
So it's still a work in progress because he's a very naturally loving boy. He loves hugs. And so how we've worked it out is the number now reducing even the number of people who he can hug and not hug. Because again, you cannot take that out of a child's life completely, that he will never hug people. Because after all, when he walks with his uncles, when he walks with other friends, he's seen them hugging people, so why can't he hug people? And so you put boundaries even in terms of the number of people, but then you especially also talk to other people to tell them, please do not hug my child. Or when he's coming towards you, extend a hand or a fist bump. So you also do education around the other people who you might encounter so that they know the way to greet your child is a fist bump, a high five, a handshake, rather than, because if his natural inclination is to hug, then you not only teach him that he cannot hug everybody, but that you teach also those around him that the preferred form of greeting is, please, when my son comes towards you, extend your fist. Once he fist bumps, he wanted to say hi.
Yeah.
That's it, it's done. Yeah.
And now, when it comes to the hormonal body change, is he aware?
So so I need to ask him whether he's aware. Actually, I haven't asked him that he's aware.
Yeah.
But then you can see the natural changes. Any other changes boys would go through at that stage, at puberty, they would. The biggest risk for kids who are autistic is that puberty might bring on seizures.
Yeah.
And a lot of kids,
do?
yeah, they do. Sometimes puberty just begins seizures. So if those are not managed at a very early age, then at the very early age, if they're not managed properly with a proper neuro, then they become a thing. They can develop into full-blown seizures that this child then experiences over and over again. But it's a risk. Not all children who are autistic will develop seizures, but some do develop seizures at onset of puberty. And for some parents, that can be like a signal that something, the body has changed. The other thing is to just look out for the normal changes that boys would go to. Is there like growth of is he getting fuzz on his face? Does he have like hair under his arm? Wherever else other kids would get, that children with disability are not exempt from those changes as well. So immediately a parent begins to notice those changes, then it's time to begin those talks, if you haven't begun again, and to begin to look at the child's environment and to begin to figure out how will you continue to keep your child safe.
Do you take him to school?
So he was in school. Oh my goodness, let's not talk about school because that is a conversation for another day. We were in school until towards the end of last semester. Then the school just told us, don't come back.
Why?
That's why I'm saying it's really, if I start going into that, it turns into another totally different interview. They never gave me an explanation. They didn't talk to me beforehand. So we're in the middle of looking for transition services, which is something that parents must take very seriously because transitioning to adulthood is key to how your child, what kind of adult your child, becomes. Recently, we were handling an issue of a 17-year-old who was being accused of molesting a young child in primary school. When I spoke to the parent, one of the things that the parent said, I asked him, so where does your child go to school? And the parent said, he's in a primary school somewhere. So we had this conversation about, don't you think you have risked the safety of your child by putting him in primary school at that age when his hormones have a different trajectory to his maybe intellectual disability or his academic capability. So we do wrong. We do wrong as parents when we force our kids with disability to be held back in primary school. We have this thing in Kenya where people want their kids to read and write. Is that the only way that a child can progress if they know how to read and write? Nowadays we have gadgets. Can your child type to communicate? Must they write? If they cannot write, they can type. If your child has been in class 1 for the last 10 years, surely, will they really get class 1? And then also, sometimes it's that the teachers in the school don't know any other way to ask for feedback in terms of understanding of the learning apart from the child to write. So anybody who's done class 1 for 10 years, surely I can promise you they know their ABCs and they know their numbers. So the teachers need to change how they seek feedback. But now for this child who's been retained in a primary school setting when his hormones are heading in the adult direction, but then you've been kept in an environment with small children. And then now you say it's the child's fault when they've touched a young child. If this child was with a 17-year-old, 17 and a 17, they will negotiate with each other. So it doesn't become that you've endangered a child. But however, when you've put this 17-year-old in a classroom with young children, you've actually risked not only the young children, I would say, but especially your child with disability. Why? Because your child with disability is the one who will encounter now the justice system in Kenya that says that at a 17 and 18 and 19-year-old child, you're now a pedophile and because you've touched a younger child. So you're actually risking your child. So I urge parents all the time, and I would say even in this interview, please parents, let your child go to the same class with their peers. Your 16-year-old child should be with 16-year-old children. Your 17-year-old child should be with 17-year-old children. That's how also they learn how to behave. When you put them in an environment where they have younger children and then you say my child has never developed, the only behavior they see is for 5-year-olds. So how will a 14-year-old behave like a 14-year-old if the behavior they see every day is a 5-year-old behavior? So we do them wrong not only in terms of helping them develop socially, because physically they're still developing, their hormones are still developing, but we retain them, and that harms them. Yeah.
So you'll still have to tell me about the school thing, because wowed in a bad way. I don't know. For the sake of this interview, because you see, most people, we have a tendency of assuming as caregivers and parents of people with disability that because I know King A has autism, I expect everybody else to know that he has autism and to treat him like he's autistic, because his understanding only gets up to a certain point. Yeah. So if you don't teach your son, because we've met a couple of times when we are doing access to justice issues, and they are a big problem. For the sake of someone who's watching this interview, are you able to like paint a picture of what you encounter when you're going to handle cases of individuals who have found themselves in the hands of the law because they molested or sexually abused someone? What that journey is like, because you're constantly getting people out of jails. For the sake of understanding, so that people can teach their children or do what they need to do. What is it like?
So one of the things then that we need to distinguish is that if when you're arrested by the police, when a person with a disability is arrested by a police, when a person with autism is arrested by the police, they might be arrested. Maybe let's just talk about the bare minimum. We have don't even talk about because we are on the trajectory for sexual offences. Let's talk about the most basic one, indecent exposure, which is a petty crime in Kenya. And that is just simply that your child removed their pants in public. And I'm calling them a child, they might be 18, they may be 19. So they removed their pants and they wanted to pee. And we encounter that all the time. Some of the things that I try to do constantly is whenever we go to a venue, first thing, show your child where the bathrooms are. Then they acclimate. That way, when the urge to go to the loo happens, they don't go to the fence, because once they have an adult body and they're going to a tree,
it's a problem.
It's a problem. First, remember, it's not like some of them are non-speaking. When you're non-speaking, you're not able to negotiate with the council policeman, or the policeman to say, oh, hey, I didn't know where. You are not able to negotiate for yourself. So you're not able to negotiate because you're not speaking, or you're not able to articulate, and then you get arrested. That's a petty crime. So now you've entered the justice system. So from the very beginning, even for parents of kids with disabilities, don't say boys are boys and girls are girls. Please do not allow your children to pee on the roadside, because it creates a problem for them when they're adults, because you're now going to be trying to tell this child who has learned one way of doing things that now they can no longer pee under that tree, they need to go to the toilet. Teach them from the very beginning, let's find a toilet. So wherever you go, first things first, find a bathroom and say this is the bathroom, and keep on asking them, do you need to go? Mistakes happen. Sometimes you do go to places where there are no bathrooms, but try and be as safe as possible. Let's talk now about
now you're in the justice system.
In the justice system. So the other thing that happens, let's talk about now the side of the parents first before we go to the side of the offender. So when we're talking about parents first, sometimes you've encountered parents whose children have been abused, and then they negotiate out at the police station because they don't have the strength to go the long haul. So if you have, the first thing when your child gets abused is to make sure that there is a medical report and there is a police report that is done. Because if you do not have those two things, then it will be very difficult to produce evidence, for evidence to be produced. When it is your child who's been abused, then just know the government is actually on your side, because the prosecutor is prosecuting on behalf of your child. So persevere, take it through to the end, because it's justice for this child. And so you need to take it to the end, right? And we have parents who occasionally we've supported to just get to the courtroom, because sometimes it's hard when the case keeps on being postponed. Access to justice then becomes kind of challenging. Then now let's talk about your child is the offender. Like in the case of this young man I was talking about earlier, who indecently touched a younger child. In such a case, your child is arrested. and that it's true something has happened, because the truth of the matter is he should not have done that. But then now, this now puts your child at risk, because from the police station trying to prove disability, then the child has to go, the person, either the teenage person or the adult has to now go for assessment, which is court ordered. So they end up going to an institution like Mathare after the court has, first of all, they are remanded, taken to court, they appear before a judge, they're taken to for assessment if the judge so orders. Then now, this is where now it gets a bit mixed up. So the judge might see that this person probably needs to stay there under observation or under treatment for a while. They might get a sentencing that puts them either in that mental health home or with the adult population in a jail, which now becomes a heartache and a headache. Both being in Mathare and being in jail, in jail is tough for persons with disability. So we do try, after the person now has served their term, we try to then figure out how they can rejoin home.
Before they serve their term, nowadays, because the law has changed a bit, I think in 2020, you've gone for assessment to measure your capacity to stand before court or otherwise. So if they are not fit to stand trial, are they released today?
No.
Okay, but if they are fit to stand trial, they go all the way.
So first and foremost, in order to prove fit to stand trial means that there has to be a lawyer who shows up and argues your case for you. Because remember, you're the person who's the offender now in this instance. So the thing that keeps people from even being able to argue that fit to stand trial story is because a lot of poverty is there and lawyers require money. And so by the time you get a lawyer to argue for you, it's how many years have passed sometimes. So poverty keeps people, like away. The other thing is, we do have cases where the person with a disability did not commit the crime at all. However, this is Kenya. We have had instances where the community insists that they did, and the parents of the kids don't have the money to hire a lawyer so that they can prove their own child did not. And so, like in a court system, it's about proving you're presumed innocent until proven guilty. However, a lot of times for the person with disability, they're guilty before they ever show up in a court, because by virtue of their disability. So some of the efforts even that we are doing is how to decriminalize disability. So disability is not a crime, and it's not that because you have a person with maybe an intellectual disability who wanders from place to place, that a crime is committed in the neighborhood, then it's that person. So just the repelling of petty crimes where persons with disability are concerned, the decriminalizing of disability, so that you don't assume persons with disability automatically did something when they did not.
In your experience, why is the police system not able to catch people with disability? Like, this person is behaving in a certain way, can we pause and determine whether they are disabled? Why do we have that gap?
Everybody is human, and you don't, just because somebody works with the police force does not mean that they are easily able to identify disability. There's also training. There's also community perceptions, family perceptions, the stigma that exists with disability. There's also how people present themselves when they show up in the police station. So I actually have great faith in the police, and because they signed up to do that job, and so they want to do a good job. We don't have a system where we don't have like an alternative dispute resolution mechanism where it's cases like this. And that's something that I believe that the office of the ODPP is trying to work out and change policies and think through what other dispute resolution mechanisms can there be. I'd like to see a time where if it's a person with disability, something has happened concerning a person with disability, that we have people who can intervene on behalf of persons with disability, number one, and then also that there are even committees of things that people who sit at the police station to determine how do we best, besides just probation services that kicks in after you have been after your case has already gone through, before the case actually comes in, how do we catch it so that this person is not at risk of greater mental health harm because of the process that they go through, either in a mental hospital or in jail. Yeah.
I'm still interested in school, because had you had, because you've said that you were told to come and take your son and go home. Had you had prior issues? It was just an out of the blue situation?
It was just an out of the blue station. It was actually a phone call. Don't bring your son back in September, and it's not unique. It's actually, my situation is not unique. It's not unique because a lot of parents go through that. Sometimes schools don't tell you. Sometimes they decide that they can't teach your child. Sometimes they just decide they don't want to do this anymore. It's not making profit for them, which is one of the reasons why we really are hoping that the government will do more inclusion services in schools, so that the school that the child goes to is the nearest primary school to the child. If my child had been in a public school, if the public school that's nearest to us was offering, actually not the public high school nearest to us was offering inclusive services, I would not have had to seek private school services. And so I would probably not have encountered the issue of don't bring your son back. And it's not a cheap school. And they didn't discuss it with me. And they didn't tell me he was having issues, so they couldn't have him anymore. But again, like I said, I'm not unique. This happens to a very big percentage of parents of kids with disabilities. They are told, don't bring back your child. Sometimes they are chased away by increasing expenses, so that you naturally give up and cannot afford the school anymore. And so we have a very large number of children with disabilities who are not in school to date. And it's not the fault of the parent. The parent naturally wants the child to go to school, but there are no, there are no facilities available. And
now, because you're in the process of getting another school, is it hard?
It's very hard because where we live, we don't have services. What I'm thinking about at the age of 16 is he needs transition services into adulthood, and those are not available in this nation. And by transition services, what I mean is, how do I prepare him for employment? He's not done with the high school part. So you see, for a parent of a child with disability, I'm forced to cut short his childhood because I want to prepare him for adulthood, because there are no institutions that will take care of him in this age where he is at, so that he learns naturally and transitions naturally into adulthood. So it's a struggle that parents have. Transition services don't exist. So the struggle is there. I'm even thinking maybe I should leave Kenya.
And then who will advocate for this? Like, you hold the largest network for people with disabilities.
But at some point, I have to start thinking that my child is a priority as well. And so the thing is, if we don't get services, I will move. So if you have an audience who knows how can we get outside of here, tell me. But then again, the biggest invitation, even with that, because if I do leave, it's I have just helped myself. But if people come even from outside who know how to run transition services and say, we know how to do this thing and would like to do it in this nation, then that opportunity exists. What do we do with teenagers who have disability? What do we do with adults? And so people might say, but there's a center near my home that does this. But the center near your home only teaches children with disability how to knit.
Arts and crafts.
Arts and crafts. Or only includes woodwork. There's nothing wrong with that. But are those the only jobs that are available for those with disability?
And is it your son's interest?
And my son is not interested in knitting, and he's not interested in beading, and he's not interested in woodwork. So if he's interested in art and music and he wants to do something with computers, so where does he end up going? And so we have this, the mental, I guess we need a mental shift in Kenya, so that people begin to see persons with disability, children and adults with disability, as capable and able to do what they themselves can do. And so we need as much training in science and tech
Yes.
as there is for those who are typical. As much training in agriculture, as much training in name it, communication, in sales, in marketing, in reception services, in whatever office work there is, it needs to be availed for those with disability because they are able to do those jobs.
Yes.
So when we relegate them to jobs that we ourselves probably think are below, then it means that we're disadvantaging them.
Yeah.
So if anybody is thinking of starting transition services, you start transition services, but to train people to enter the job market, and it's all jobs, not just specifically, let's make mats with wool and let's bid.
Yeah.
Our children with disabilities are supposed to compete with the poor in a Maasai market. What are we really saying? Yeah.
There's a reserve for them, and there's where they can go.
So they need to enter the job market at all levels, and for that you need transition services.
So I feel like we've discussed a lot. Maybe do you feel like there's something we need to
No.
So there is one question that I saw, which maybe we can now use it to sum up today's interview. On social media, where do people with adults now, where do adults with developmental disabilities, that person was specific to autism, so let me rephrase it. Where do adults with autism go?
So adults with autism are in their homes,
Yes.
in their houses. That's why I'm saying transition services are very important. You need them in jobs,
Yes.
but then there are not that very many jobs that are, actually I don't know very many jobs that are specifically availed for adults with autism. And so it's up to the parents to begin advocating. If you're a parent, go to your employer and ask why your employer is not employing people with disability, because when you create space for your child who is 5 years old, when you create space for adults with disability and your child is 2 years old, 3 years old, 5 years old, it means that you're creating space for your child to join the job market when they're an adult. So this does not just apply to parents who have adult children, because maybe for them they might say it's too late for me to go to my HR and ask. But however, if your child is small right now and they have a disability, go to your HR and say, let us begin an inclusion service. Every organization, you can go and tell your HR, let's begin an inclusion service in our work, in our job place. Because once you begin including in workplaces, once you start identifying within employment what jobs are easily held by those with disability. For example, if a wheelchair user needs a job, really the only thing they need is to be able to access the building safely.
Yes.
But otherwise, can they sit behind a computer and a desk? Yes. Nowadays, even those who are visually impaired are able to use computers because we have voice activated. Those who are autistic can use computers in offices because, again, voice activated.
Yes.
So you do not, we've been limiting jobs. However, they can do everything. So if you're a HR person, if you're a parent of a child with disability, go to your boss and say, how do we begin inclusion in the workplace?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think that's all. Thank you very much.
Sawa.
We have gotten a lot of information from transitioning to teenage, what happens if you don't teach your child what they need to know, and inclusion in the education system. So I feel like at the end of the day, it's about having the right information to be able to treat, to be able to have the inclusion, because a lot of things this year have been inclusion means, and having the right information is the best way to start. We've come to the end of our interview, and our biggest takeout should be puberty is not hindered by disability and vice versa. So I hope you have learned a thing or two, and if you have any questions, please leave them in the comment section. We're going to get back to you as soon as possible. Until then, be safe and make good choices.